Louis Larue. I'm from Belgium, from the Hoover Chair in Louvain, and I will present on a general framework of a neutral framework for classifying currencies. So there are two parts in my presentation. The first is a critique, I would say, criticism of how alternative currencies are usually defined, and a defense. The second part is a defense of an alternative way to define them. So just to start, okay, I had another PowerPoint, but it's not working, so I'm using the PDF, so there is no suspense in my presentation. So the problem is that I believe most existing definitions and classifications have two problems. The first is that they exhibit a positive bias towards complementary or social currencies, and I will explain why it's a problem. And second, they exclude a priori some similar currencies that they do not consider for some reasons. I won't argue that it's bad to believe that it's good, that alternative currencies are good, or that we should defend them. What I will defend is rather that when we define what is a currency, we should make general and neutral distinctions. So what I call generalities, distinction is general if it applies to all possible currencies. So I will define it later, but it's general if it divides the all possible set of all possible currencies into two subsets. I will give examples later. And neutrality means that distinctions should be free from any positive or negative bias towards one or another currency. And the aim is to enable an ethics of alternative currencies. That is, to separate the description of what is a currency from the discussion, the assessment of what should be a monetary policy, a currency, and so on. So I will briefly review some ways of classifying currency. I will not do everything. It will be quite quick here. And then I will define why I believe generality and neutrality are important. And finally, I will give several examples of neutral and general distinctions. So there are usually two ways of classifying currencies. The first way is to classify them by generations, so by historical appearance. So for instance, Blanc says first came the lets, then the time banks, then the local regional currencies, then the more complex schemes like the Nu in the Netherlands, the Sol in France, or in Belgium we had the Eco Iris and stuff like this. Marie Farr adds a fifth generation, which is carbon currencies, and Fang and Longhurst and Michel and Hudon uses the same kind of the same way of classifying currencies. Another way to classify currency is to classify them by purposes. So we say, for instance, I take the two articles of Blanc, but okay, in the paper I discuss more things. We could, for instance, separate currencies by motives. There is a political motive. Some currencies may be created by governments. There is a profit motive. Some currencies may be created by firms, private firms. And a civic motive, that's more complex, according to Blanc. So that's what he calls social currencies. And they have three distinct features. They localize the economy and foster local exchanges. So he separates the two functions. But most importantly, they help transforming the nature of exchange into exchanges less influenced by market values, impersonal relations, individualistic values, and stuff like this. Blanc uses in another paper, he takes kind of the same classification. He separates social currencies into three kinds of currencies, like local currencies that are linked to territorial projects, community currencies, that help foster social relations, so that's more the kind of currencies that help transforming the nature of exchanges, and complementary currencies that help localize the economic exchanges. So I think you know all that, so I will not be too long. The problem for me is twofold. The first is that there are some a priori criteria that help defining these currencies. So these definitions are not general. I will just take the example of Blanc. He says, for instance, he only considers in social currencies and in community currencies democratic and grassroots currencies. So it's not general because I will show this later, but for instance, defining it as democratic would mean that, a government currency could be democratic. We could have a democratic euro. I have colleagues that work on that. A private initiative, private firm currency could be democratic. You could have, we could say that the WIR is a kind of private currency, but it's also kind of democratic. We could also have grassroots currencies that are not civic currencies or social currencies. So, I don't know, for instance, we have private currencies that are grassroots, that are present locally, but that are not social currencies. So here, you ignore some currencies for some reason that it's not very clear, but that allows to define, for me, not generally, what is a currency. But the biggest problem is that there is an a priori positive bias towards a currency. So, for instance, in Blanc, as I said, he defines social currencies as currencies less influenced by market values. But this is a normative criteria. And I will show that this is a problem just in a minute. In 2 words, why is it a problem? It's because it blurs the distinction between why we should care about a currency and what is a currency. It may be very useful to define what is a currency without any bias. I will show examples, it will be more clear. So, just to rephrase what I mean by generality and neutrality. So, a distinction is neutral if it divides the complete set of all possible objects into 2 subsets. So, in my case, currencies. So, it needs to take into account all possible kinds of currencies and divides it according to one criteria into 2 subsets. And it's neutral if it does not assume a priori that a currency is better than another or that we should prefer a currency over another, etc., etc. Yeah?
You say in the first one 2 subsets. Can it be 3 or 5?
Yeah, of course. It's just because mine, I'm dividing them into 2 subsets. I think it's better to have 2 subsets because it's clearer. You have actually, I will have several subsets because I will make several distinctions. But it's clear to have one distinction, and also it enables to have one normative questions. Because I'll show that the purpose here is not to leave aside all the normative issues or the critical issues. It's just to say, if we want to have, as I said, a real normative assessment of those currencies, we need to know first what they are, and then to have such an assessment. And having 2 subsets, we could ask questions such as, is it better to be in subset A or in subset B? Is it better to have such currencies or such currencies? So that we can have multiple, or degrees. I will show that we can have degree, and so having multiple subsets. So I have 3 reasons why I believe generality and neutrality are important. I've already talked about that, but the first is that we need clear and transparent criteria. So I said, for instance, the democratic criteria, for me, it's not clear. What is democratic? Or what is grassroots? We can have private for-profit currencies that are grassroots and democratic, but is it social currency? I don't know. The second reason, and the most important, is the fact that many currencies have common features and hidden common features or hidden flaws. For instance, Bitcoin is not often considered in complementary currency research, but it has many common features and common characteristics with CC. I'll just take an example. I started studying Bitcoin and I realized that it was used very often for fraud, not to pay taxes and stuff like this. And then the same day, I spoke with a promoter of a local currency in Belgium, in Louvain, and he said, the main argument in favor of the local currencies for him was that we didn't have to pay taxes with this currency. So I said, but it's like Bitcoin, you know? So I think it's useful to include Bitcoin in our research because, it makes me think of, maybe that's some flaw that I didn't consider before. And the third, so why do we need neutral distinctions? It's because we need to make fair comparisons between currencies. We need not to a priori think that a currency is better than another, so it's more democratic or stuff like this. And it helps enabling a sane ethical assessment of these currencies. So I won't talk about the moral and epistemic values because it will take too long. I will just give some examples of three distinctions that I think are important, and I'll show that these distinctions are neutral in general, but they allow to have an ethical discussion about the pros and cons of different currencies. So the first is really not original, it's just to say that there are official and alternative currencies. Official currencies are legal tenders, so the money that, the means of payment that is acceptable for all debts and tax payments. And others are alternative currencies. So basically, the dollar, the euro, the yen are official currencies, and the rest are alternative currencies. So this is not very original, I agree. A second one is that we can have central or community currencies. A central currency is managed by a central authority, while a community currency is managed by the whole community. And again, you can divide all into two subsets, one where there is a central authority, one where there is not, or rather where each member can alter the central institution. Because of course, in every currency, there is some central institution, but the difference here is that individuals may or may not alter decisions taken by the central institution. We cannot alter what the central bank, the EU central bank does, but we can alter, if we are a member of a LETS, of a local currency, the decision of the board of trustees of the local currency. Most community currencies are also alternative currencies, but not all are. For instance, air miles, so this it's a private for-profit currency, like a loyalty scheme held by airlines companies. That's a central currency. That's the company that decides what is this currency, but that is not an official currency. The last distinction, and the one that I think is most interesting, is between universal and bounded currencies. So universal currency is a currency that is acceptable in payment for all goods and services, everywhere, for whatever goods, without limits. While bounded currencies, possible uses are limited in accordance with a purpose. For instance, we can have geographic limits, communitarian limits, or environmental limits. So geographic limits, for instance, is the local currency. It's only valid locally. Communitarian limits is the LETS. It's only valid for to buy or to exchange services with another member of the same community. Environmental limits, it's the carbon currencies, for instance. Note that the euro, of course, cannot buy everything. You cannot buy babies with euro. But the point is that if babies were for sale, you could buy babies with euros. And borders are not the point either, because you can buy African products with euros, but you cannot buy African products with local currencies. So the point here is that is it able to buy everything that is for sale or not? And here, again, most alternative and community currencies are bonded currencies, but not all. For instance, Bitcoin is an alternative currency. It's in a way a community currency, but it's not a bounded currency, because you can buy everything in Bitcoin. Of course, it has to be for sale, but if it's for sale, you can buy it. What is the point of these three distinctions? So I said it's general, so it cuts the whole set of currencies into two subsets. It's neutral. I'm not saying here that it's better to be universal or bounded, but it helps asking, I think, interesting questions. So here, just to sum up, for the euro is the central universal currency. LETS is a community and bounded currency. Bitcoin is community and universal, as I said. Hermes or WIR is central and bounded. So we can have, I just put some examples because, okay, it's small here, but in the paper, again, I discuss more currencies. Okay, just to conclude, as I said, why is neutrality and generality important? For clarity, for fair comparisons, and for a fair ethical assessment. And that's just what I want to talk now. What I mean, what is a fair ethical assessment? So for instance, the first distinction is about legal tender. So a question that we could ask is whether there should be one or several legal tenders. That's an important question and an ethical question. So in ethics, we don't ask whether something is possible. We ask whether something is desirable. So should we do it or not? The other question is related to central authorities. So should money be created by a central independent authority, or should the whole community of users participate in its management? I've never read in ethics a paper on that subject, but I think it would be very interesting, and I believe that my distinctions enable such questions. And the third is, should money's possible uses be restricted according to geographic and communitarian limits? So for instance, should money be based on the model of local currencies? So should we allow the circulation and of money only within a defined local areas or regional area? Or should money be able to buy everything? Or should we put limits to what money can buy based on environmental issues, for instance? On that two subjects, there is a debate. And usually philosophers think it's bad to put local limits, actually, and to put communitarian or geographic limits, because they think that's arbitrary and that limits people's opportunities and stuff like this. But this is an important debate. And I think if we define clearly and generally and neutrally what is a currency, we can ask that kind of question. So thank you. This is my email if you want to contact me. Thank you for attending. Please.
Here. Okay.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for your presentation. I like it very much. And I mostly agree on what your arguments on why you need to have a new kind of classification for community currencies, but your position is more critical of what we have already. So do you have any proposition on how we can really create a new classification for community currency, or at least are you working on this?
Shall I answer directly?
No, I think it's better to make more questions and after you answer.
So it's a little similar to the first question. Could you just say in which context you're doing that research? Is that part of your degree or your official position at the university, or is that a private thing? Because it seemed a bit disparate what you're doing and then the reference to ethics. So I would have guessed you're at the philosophy department and work on ethics and have a personal interest in currency, but that would be interesting to know. And the other thing is, by your own criteria, I was surprised to see you still using a few terms that to me are not matching your criteria, but maybe you have a clear definition, particular as for example, the term community and the term local. Those seem to go contra your own quality criteria, so to say.
Mm-hmm. You mean it's not neutral? That's what you mean?
They're not clear even. I don't know what you mean by
Okay.
Okay. Hi. I agree with some of your critique on the, let's say, with the current framework of classifying community currencies and complementary currencies also. But I don't know if your examples are already your propositions. If they are some kind of propositions, I would like to say some critiques or some comments.
Uh-huh.
First of all, the geographical limit, it's not clear to me because most of national monies are limited geographically. I cannot use Brazilian currency to buy things here in Europe. Actually, there's only one currency that you can universally use. It's dollar, and maybe and euro also almost. So this is one point. And sorry. Bitcoin is universal. Yeah, Bitcoin. Yeah, sure. Yeah. And about the authority, I think it's complex because using central authority criteria to separate the currencies, but sometimes in community currencies, and some authors and some studies claim that there is some kind of central authority. The users recognize brokers or the community bank or whatever it is. They recognize sometimes it as a central authority, even in the level of community. So it's a very a theoretical discussion and very interesting. So maybe it's not a good way of separating currencies.
Mm-hmm.
So this is my comment, and thank you for the
Thank you.
presentation.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I would have missed some more methods of describing different monies. Like, should there can be a credit created money, or a money like that is a present, like a basic income, or like this state can buy something with it, or should the central bank control the amount of money, or should private banks control the amount of money, and in the end the demand of the user who takes the credit, or like, if you take a credit that it's possible, so you put your money on the bank for 1 month, and there's a time shift that projects for 10 years can be financed with money which is originally only 1 month, and so on. So I think there's a lot of more possibilities to describe monetary systems and to depict the advantages and disadvantages. And I think, maybe you can describe if you have thought about this and what your next steps are. Thank you.
But maybe I can reply to this and then to take a second round. Oh, okay. But as you want. I have. Okay. So maybe just the last one. I could add or have added many other distinctions. That's true, and I'm working on that. It's just a proposal. That's true that I could, for instance, think of a distinction between different ways of creating money through credit or not, or through other ways, or helicopter money or stuff like this. So I'm thinking of that, but it's not still very clear in my head. So, but thank you for the idea. So the first question was, is it a proposal or what is to be done? So, and I will maybe answer also the second question on the context at the same time. So, I'm working in ethics and in philosophy of economics also, but so the point is to okay, maybe the starting point of the article was that many people talk to me on what is complementary currency, blah blah blah. What is that? I've seen the movie Demain, and what strikes me was that they were every time they were like, complementary currencies is good money and euro is bad money, and that's the definition. I'm not saying that's what's done in the literature, but for many people that's what they think. And I said, oh, that's a problem, because that doesn't help explaining what is these currencies, but that also doesn't help the researcher that wants to argue for or against one another currency. So that was my starting point. So I started to build reflect on what is these currencies, what clearly would be a definition. And so I acknowledge that also definitions were pervaded by normative ideas. So I tried to build a definition without these normative bias. So that was the starting point. But I'm still working on it, and as the last question pointed out, there are still other distinctions to be made, and but my point is that I think it's useful to make distinctions that have a normative, that can open a normative question. So say, oh, should there be one or several legal tenders? Should there be one? Should there be geographic limits or not, and stuff like this? And so, should we favor these currencies or these other currencies? That's maybe the thing. And the context. So on the context, I think I'm working in ethics, but I need definitions. I need to know what's my subject. So I'm interested in the ethics of monetary reforms and what kind of reforms we should do. So this is an example of the kind of reforms. And so I'm wondering whether we should reform the management of money, or the purchasing power of money, or the multiplicity of money. That these are different questions, and I think it's useful to consider each of these questions separately. That's why I did several distinctions. So on the terms like community and local, that's not clear. I think this criteria, that's a question of degree. The point is not that, okay, the whole community of users. I think the community is quite clear. That's the people that use the money. So for instance, I use euro. I'm a member of the members using the euro, but I have no power or very little to alter. So the criteria is really, do people have the power to alter the decision of the... Okay, here I shorten my sentence, but do people have the power to alter the central institutions that take the decisions? And so it's a question of degree. For instance, euro is maybe the lowest degree, and if you are exchanging with your grandmother and you are only two, that's the highest degree. But I think it's quite clear what I call the community of users is simply the people using the money. So, yeah. No, they don't. They don't. It's written in the ECB stuff that they are independent and that blah blah blah. So of course there is a very long way. Okay, citizens elect representatives. Representatives choose prime ministers. Prime ministers choose members of the board. Members of the board choose directors, and then the directors take the decision. But I mean, for me to alter the decision of the director, it's, I mean, 6 steps, you know, so that's much longer than for a LETS, for instance. But I agree that it's maybe the most problematic distinction, so I should work on it. So that's good that you... I have some problem also with that, but I think still that there is something going on here. So, yeah. And on the geographic limits, no, I think the borders, as I said, are not the issues. You can buy African stuff with euros. You just need to change. You cannot buy African stuff with LETs, because it's, or with local currencies, if they are not convertible, of course. So, you know, that's the point. You can buy anything with euros. You just need to import them. So I don't remember who asked this question. It's you, yeah. So I argue for that a bit longer in the paper, but that's the point is the following. And yeah, I think I replied to all questions, I hope.
Around round to have further force and after and she there. And that's
Who wants to